Okay, welcome back to the show. We got Michael Kimball, a reporter at the Daily Oklahoman, covers city council beat. He's been in the business for longer than you would probably guess with his young looks. He was there in the field of Boise State, right when OU lost to So you started as a sports reporter, and then you moved and you stayed in it, and you adapted to what they needed at the Oklahoman.
That's right. I was working with the illustrious arts and entertainment editor at the Oklahoma Daily at that time, a guy named Danny, actually.
Yeah. I heard he was great.
Yeah, he was.
Heard he got to go to Who concerts. And
yeah, right.
He worked real hard. Well, I'm bringing you on here because I noticed on the internet that you were doing something sort of interesting to me. And I come at this from a perspective where I don't work in journalism anymore, and so there's 2 days a week I can get news. I get the Sunday Times, and then I look online. I get most of all my news on Twitter now. Mm-hmm. And I noticed that you had posted a lot of your coverage of city council meetings on Twitter. Tell me a bit about how that came about at the Oklahoman, and how you decided to do it.
I started my Twitter account because, obviously it's a new way to reach readers, particularly readers that don't read the Oklahoman, news consumers of other kinds. But when the live tweeting thing specifically seemed to the light came on for me, in other words, when about a year ago, Oklahoma City was considering adding sexual orientation to the protected classes of employment. It's actually not explicitly protected under federal law that you can't be discriminated against because of your sexual orientation. And so Oklahoma City is the latest city locally that wanted to add that protection explicitly into the city code. And so when that started happening, the meeting became pretty interesting pretty quickly with quotes. It's obviously a polarizing issue, especially around these parts. Mm-hmm. And the more I started tweeting about it, it became just an unofficial live tweet at that time. Mm-hmm. My follower count went up. People were retweeting. People were talking back. It engaged readers in a way that I hadn't been able to do before personally in any setting. And so that was when I really realized the value. And I think the most important thing about it is that I work for the newspaper and the website, but no matter what I do for those two entities, there's a significant portion of the population that's not going to look at either of them. And part of that population uses Twitter. And so it's another way where you can reach people who are affected by this news and interested in this news and would be engaged if they only were aware of that kind of news. And so you could really tell, you sort of develop instincts for what's going to be interesting because the Twitter demographic is maybe a little different from the newspaper demographic. I got more interest on the sexual orientation than maybe when I wrote about the senior health and wellness centers for MAPS 3, for example. But I found it to be a pretty indispensable tool for reaching other people and then also engaging your audience.
Right. And so did you feel like you were getting a better give and take between you and your audience?
Oh, sure.
You started using Twitter?
Sure. First of all, there is no give and take in the newspaper. You put it and it shows up on people's doorstep, and then they consume it, and then they put it on the bottom of their bird cage or into recycling or wherever it goes, then you could try to engage readers on the comments section of a News OK story, I suppose. But if you've been to any website and looked at the comment section, not exactly the highest level of human discourse. And not to say that Twitter is, but it's instant. You can respond to people. People have questions. You can answer them. You can tell what people are interested in. And then it shapes your coverage.
Well, it seems to in a way, it figures itself out to be more professional almost now that I think about it, because they have a direct access to you. Mm-hmm. When you're making a comment, it's almost like, oh, I could be funny here and nobody's going to know who I am. But if they're talking directly to the guy who's handling a Twitter account, maybe they're more serious.
Yeah, and they know that anything that they say could then get retweeted to the other people who who follow me or follow other official News OK accounts and all that. So specifically, I think the most important thing about it is it makes, especially when you're talking from the perspective of using Twitter to cover public meetings.
Right.
There are people that are wherever they are. They could be at a stoplight. They could be at their office. They could be in their house. They could be at a swimming pool, whatever. You're engaging them in public conversation in a way that is impossible with most other mediums that we have access to. Yeah. And so that adds value to a news consumer. And obviously for the news organization, you hope that translates into them the soft power of showing people that you're an organization that can be trusted. and that you're worth going back to, and maybe they'll come back to, to some of your other content forms as well.
Yeah, so this is to say the Oklahoman hasn't figured out how to make money off you guys using Twitter.
No, and as far as I know, I mean, Twitter's barely made it,
Right.
figured out how to make a lot of money from it. I mean, promoted tweets and things like that. But, the first person that figures out a way to monetize things like Twitter for a business in direct ways is going to be a very rich person, no matter what business it is. But, it's a conversation worth having. It's already, at this point, everybody in the media business looks back at the mid-1990s when people, like newspapers, put their content online that was the same content that was in the newspaper that people were paying for. At the time, they thought that the internet was just going to be a way to promote their content. Now we all look back and we realize that was a mistake. We should have been paying for content, forcing people to pay for content that they were already accustomed to paying for in other mediums at that time. And that the fact that people became accustomed to getting news for free on the internet has been a financial problem for media organizations in the last 10 or 15 years. So now we're all in a rush to give out information for free on Twitter. And so it's hard to say. I definitely am not qualified to say whether or not that is a good decision yet. But from a pure journalism perspective, obviously you want to engage news consumers in any way you can and provide them information, and then maybe just figure out the rest later. And so certainly the Oklahoman thinks that they can create some value for themselves, and any newspaper does by attracting people to the various Twitter pages. But at the same time, you'd like to think that there's going to be a way to make some real money off of providing news in the online medium at some point.
Yeah. Well, a bit about that money. We know that a lot of jobs have been lost in journalism. When I keep track of your Twitter feeds, I notice that a lot of you more investigative type reporters can take to Twitter and engage, citizens or readers or something. I noticed that you guys were doing that on the open records case. This is something that not a lot of people pay attention to, but you seem to be drumming up a lot of attention to it on Twitter. What's going on with open records right now?
Well, the short version of the story, there's a lot of abuses, for lack of better words, in open records right now in Oklahoma government. The governor has decided that she's claiming privileges that no other governor has ever claimed before, and basically saying that it's none of your business how they reached their decision to not take federal money and then not use the state to open up the healthcare exchange. The Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation arrested a minor without disclosing the information you have to disclose whenever you arrest somebody, whenever you take somebody's liberty away. Talk about a basic right, not having the government spirit you away. So all these things together, you can reach people directly and quickly with social media and hear what they say, and they can let people know, like Governor Fallin or anyone else, know that they're paying attention, that they're listening. And so even if people are, I don't necessarily subscribe to the belief that people are talking more about politics or anything else than maybe they used to.
Right.
However, you certainly can be aware of whatever anybody is talking about in the coffee shop if they tweet it, as opposed to just having to be in physical proximity to them to listen to them. And so the value in letting people know what you think, whether it's a news organization or a politician or anybody else, and that you're listening, I think is pretty hard to calculate. And so when you can use social media to engage people in ways that you can in the newspaper, we're allowed a little bit more freedom, and whether or not that is a good thing, that'll be debated and discussed over the next 10 years. But you're able to use a little bit more personality, get people interested in what you have to say. And, even unbiased journalists, there are a few things that you got to call attention to. And journalism, you need to call attention to open records, open meetings, all those abuses. And so if you can use social media to get people interested in it and show that they're engaged and show that they care, it's kind of hard to put a value on that kind of power.
Right. So just to fill you guys in, right now, it appears publications like the Oklahoman have filled out open records request acts to Governor Fallin and at the Capitol, and they have not responded.
Well, and
claiming executive privilege.
Yeah, to look at her emails, and the reasoning has been that that people maybe heard other high elected officials, appointed officials high in the government would be more reluctant to share their candid opinions if they knew that it was going to be a public record. Well, I have two responses to that. First of all, they knew it was an open record as soon as they started using their government email. Nobody at that level
the government email is covered under the act.
Yes, and anybody at that level is not going to be naive to that. They all understood that. And the second thing, please, Governor, or anybody else, explain to me and to the Oklahoma people why it's none of my business, why we should not know the candid opinions of the most important people, most powerful people in the state. It should be the opposite. If you can only be honest, if the public doesn't hear you, then what kind of government are we running here? If you can hide people away in jails without even telling people who they are and what they did, does it get any more basic than that? I think, a lot of people are willing to talk about, their rights these days and how the government is violating their rights. Well, does it get any more basic than being able to stop the government from taking people's liberty without saying why, or deciding that you are not smart enough or not good enough or not entitled to know the honest discussions that take place in public forums, which, any government building is a public forum, by the way. Unacceptable to me, unacceptable to journalists, unacceptable, I think, to a lot of people in Oklahoma, and that's where you can kind of start that conversation or continue the conversation on social media.
Yeah. Are people interested in that?
Maybe probably not as much as they should be, is the honest truth.
Yeah.
I mean, people are interested in it, and it's starting to gain steam. I mean, the more you write about it, the more you call attention to how basic some of these rights violations are, more people are paying attention. But people talk about the media and, whether it's mainstream or not, and the things that they cover, and look at, people care more about Jersey Shore or whatever, than election. Well, sometimes consumers need to look in the mirror a little bit when it comes to that chicken and the egg. What did you click on today? Ask yourself. If you're a news consumer, did you click on hard-hitting stories? Did you click on investigative stories? Did you show interest in the stories that advance public discussions, or did you click on the last time a body washed up in the creek, or the latest sex crime with a juicy detail? Ask yourself what you clicked on, and then decide who's to blame for what the media covers. Now, I'm not saying that media deserves all the blame or consumers deserve all the blame, but what you click on is what the media is going to report on. What you decide is news is what these businesses are going to bring you for consumption, and so demand better.
Mm-hmm. Well, all that said, you have been kind of like what I call in the trenches reporter, which is my name for having to work every day and have a deadline. To me, that's grunt work. And, that's why I became a hobo.
Yeah, a hobo with a talk show.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so people like you are in the trenches in my imagination. Mm-hmm. But you've decided that even now you're going to try something else.
Yeah, that's true. In my own
you're
personal
leaving journalism.
life, I'm leaving journalism. It's definitely more of a personal decision, than a philosophical decision. In my case, I'm leaving for a family business unrelated to journalism in another state, and certainly. The changing nature of journalism as a way to provide a means to live to somebody is changing, and it's changed in the time since we've graduated college together in 2007, only 5.5 years ago.
Yeah.
But in my first 5 years at the paper, 4 years at the paper, I went through 3 major layoffs and made it through them all. Mm-hmm. The business is changing. We don't know if it's good or bad, and that definitely was part of my decision to sort of seek, maybe some other stability in another thing. And that raises the larger point that goes back to what we were just talking about in terms of chicken and egg. These news consumers out there are the ones who are going to decide whether or not they get quality journalism in the future. No matter what you say about mainstream news organizations, alternative news organizations, the only news organizations that have the time and resources to do the kind of journalism that matters at the most basic level, the fourth estate, reporting on government, are the kind of organizations that have the resources to pay their employees a living wage and provide them with insurance coverage and everything else. It is just asking too much of people out there in the world to go make their living doing another job and provide that kind of a journalism service in their spare time and to provide it to you for free. So consumers have to ask themselves, are you willing to pay for the kind of journalism that matters? And if you are, then you should pay for it from one source or another, whether it's subscribing to be behind the paywall at a website, whether it's subscribing to a newspaper, or even whether it's responding to advertisements, I guess you could say, in some of the ways that you consume media. But consumers need to take ownership of the media businesses by participating in demanding better coverage and being willing to pay for it. Because I think that if consumers, if we just stopped journalism today, if we could just go into tomorrow without journalism, you would find that your government and businesses conduct themselves in a manner entirely different than what it does today. And so when you remember that journalists have the same power to file an open records request that anybody does, we have no additional powers because we work for a newspaper or a TV station.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that those people that have those powers are going to be able to take time away from taking their kid to soccer practice and fixing dinner and mowing the lawn and all that to be able to provide those services to people for free. So mainstream media companies need to keep it up and keep providing this content for as long as they can with the hope that people are going to pay attention. And people that want that kind of coverage are going to have to seek it out, and they're going to have to pay for it.
Right. And a lot of people, I mean, just listening to you talk about it, a lot of people don't even approach like the Oklahoman because of its editorial reputation as like the most conservative newspaper. But they continue to have enough money to employ reporters like yourself and Steve Lackey-Meyer who are going after the open records case. So there's still good reporting going on there.
Yeah, I would think it's important. Everybody should be an informed news consumer. You should be aware of what the Oklahoman's editorial stances are if you live in Oklahoma City, and you can decide for yourself what you believe with, and you can decide for yourself whether that colors any of the reporting in the Oklahoman or any other news entity. But I do, from having been on the inside of this news organization and having people, having contacts and friends with people that are involved in other news organizations, I think that the reputation that many media outlets have of having reporters that have their coverage colored by the editorial stances of their organization is a little overblown by people that think that it really has that much of effect. I think most people in most stories most reporters in most stories operate completely independently of their editorial board, and they don't allow what their editorial board thinks to color their reporting. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, in Oklahoma, it's less important whether or not you agree with the editorial, or any state. It's less important whether you agree with the editorial stance of a particular organization than it is to know what their editorial stance is, be able to judge for yourself whether that colors any of their reporting, and just know what other authoritative news sources out there are. And if there's a better one, then consume it. But don't not consume something just because you might think that you don't like their editorial stance. Judge it on more than that. And in Oklahoma, I challenge anybody to find more authoritative news sources than the Oklahoman and the Tulsa World on any subject, really. TV stations do a good job doing what they cover and what they cover, but I can tell you, having been inside city council meetings for a year and a half, TV stations do not have a regular dedicated presence in the council. There are reporters who show up there, and there are reporters that do a good job, but it's not their main job. And the Gazette sends people there, and it's that's another legitimate news source. But in Oklahoma, tell me who does a better job than providing the news. That's not to say that it couldn't be better, but you want the best, and so consume the best. Whether it's whiskey or news, right?
There you go.
But yeah,
we consume the best here.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the studio. So back when let's go back to like friend stuff. We used to. One thing we could agree on is that we both like Chuck Klosterman, the writer.
Right.
That's one thing we always talked about in
thought
in the
experiments,
newsroom.
baby. Yeah.
Thought experiments.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems that when it started, he was writing on my team, the music team, and now he's just writing a bunch of sports stories.
Well, first of all, Bill Simmons throwing some money at you will do that, I guess, right?
Yeah.
The opportunity to do that. But no, I think, we both agree that he's one of the more thought-provoking writers for our generation. But the most recent story he wrote got both of us thinking a little bit.
The
Spurs. The quick background is that the San Antonio Spurs, decided to send some of their key players home before a big game at their own discretion, and then were fined $250,000 for it. And so the discussion that Chuck started was based on the premise of competition itself, and whether or not the larger scheme of things in the NBA and the product that's presented, what consumers expect in terms of a competitive product. I don't know, what did you think about that situation?
Well, I actually didn't think much of it, because there was a difference between David Stern, who levied this like $250,000 fine on the head coach of the Spurs for seating all of his star players, Tim Duncan and Ginobili or whoever else, and I was thinking not a big deal because a coach is just thinking ahead, and there's like 100 games in the year, and so you get desensitized to which games matter or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then David Stern is thinking about every game. He wants every game to be exciting. So I thought about it as a fundamental clash. Like, he's always gotten in fights with coaches and stuff. Mm-hmm. But when they talked about the way that we look at athletes now, individual success versus team success, I thought that was interesting.
Well, and the other thing too, that you look at that I thought was interesting as well is the way Klosterman ultimately concluded that he sided with Stern because of the extra factors that are at play that off the court of the NBA that actually add to the value of the NBA as a competitive enterprise and as entertainment. It's not simply, who had more points than one team at the end of the fourth quarter. And go back to, for an example, for how the narrative of the NBA and other sports really, but the narrative of the NBA is important to how we consume it and choose to place importance on it. Go back to the Thunder playing against the Heat in the finals. Kevin Durant has unceasingly been presented as like the anti-LeBron James in the mainstream media for a long time.
Right.
And so
he's like a team player.
Yeah, he's a team player. Right after LeBron James announced his decision to switch teams on national television, Kevin Durant tweeted his decision to sign a long-term extension with Oklahoma City and stay in his small-town market. Now, that narrative, the good versus evil or whatever you want to call it, added to the value of the NBA Finals. It was more of just what's the best basketball team in the world. It was two competing ideologies from a superstar, competing ideologies to construct a team, competing ideologies to what a star should be and what he should mean to a community and whether or not a community should mean more to a superstar. All of those things were symbolically also at stake in the NBA Finals. And so I do buy that in any competitive. So
you're saying you cried when we lost?
Yeah, pretty close. Yeah, pretty close. Although I was already in acceptance by the time we actually lost. But
that was rough.
But those kinds of things do matter. What makes college football matter in Oklahoma? What made college football matter in Oklahoma was it in the 50s when everybody was crapping all over us because we were all Tom Joad. OU football beat teams from the East Coast. OU football beat teams from the West Coast. OU football beat everybody everywhere. 47 straight games, a record that's never been beat. That was the value of football in Oklahoma. That is why football is part of the fabric in Oklahoma. That is what made us stand up as a state. I mean, there's the infamous quote that George Lynn Cross said, we need a university that the football team can be proud of.
Yeah.
Football put Oklahoma on the map. Football added value to competition, to mere competition to an entire state. And so, that's talking about football and putting Oklahoma on the map. That's a long way from David Stern finding the Spurs $250,000. But it comes back to the fact that those things are important. They're what add to the value that gives us the importance of those kinds of sports competitions. And to me, I'm thankful that we have guys like Chuck Klosterman around that bring up those kinds of arguments. And he admits in the middle of that story really that it's almost like an invented problem, in some ways.
Yeah.
But I think it's an interesting thought worth having, especially, by the way, when the teams like the Thunder play in taxpayer financed arenas.
Yeah, exactly. And they're bringing a lot to the economy right now.
Yeah.
But a lot of their ethos draws from that they are a team, and that's why everyone was real upset about Harden leaving. People were very emotional about that because of this. It's just this kind of dichotomy, right? Like, we want that all-star player that can do the flip while he's making the three, and we want that guy who can have the highlight, but we also want the team. Mm-hmm. So which one do we want more?
Well, and basketball stars are the most marketable ones in America. If you look at, there's Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. And then everyone else who's a sports star that makes a lot of money endorsements are all basketball players. And it's been like that with basketball for a long time, dating all the way back to Michael Jordan. And so if you look at those personalities and into other kinds of things, whether it's the cohesion of a team in Oklahoma City or just the NBA soap opera, that also is what makes the NBA or any other sport or any other competitive enterprise consumable to such a wide audience. My wife sits next to me with our season tickets, and when I'm watching a basketball game, last night we played the Hornets, and the Thunder played the Hornets, and I knew every basketball player that was on the floor all the time for the Hornets and everything else. Now, Suzanne, my wife, who is an avid Thunder fan, she doesn't. Her enjoyment and participation in the NBA is not on that level. She knows a couple players for the Hornets. She knows Anthony Davis because he's got a unibrow and he's the number 1 pick. But she doesn't know all of the other guys on the court. Now, so back to the Spurs thing, that's one reason why everybody just has to accept at face value that you're getting the highest quality competition possible on the floor right now. We have to have that as a given from the NBA, that we're getting each team's best effort because you're paying to attend those things. But it also shows, is Suzanne's favorite thing, like pick and roll defense? No, it's the personalities, it's the drama, it's the storylines, it's the things that give richness and texture to what is otherwise just a 45-minute game that you play on the playground.
Right. So I got the impression I really like this topic. With
Me
the
too.
Spurs, I got the point that, okay, so the fans didn't get the best competition for that game. Has that ever happened with the Thunder?
Well, I certainly wouldn't think that.
Is it like a college game all the time?
Now, in one game, I can't think of anything that happened, but you got to remember the way that the Thunder was built, and it was to intentionally get bad. That's now called the Thunder model, because the way in the NBA to succeed is to go to the bottom so you can get a superstar like Kevin Durant who will lift you up to the top.
That's a business model, like Moneyball.
Like Moneyball, and you build up these assets, these young players, these draft picks until you find out what you can keep. And so there's always going to be there was going to be an air of falseness or whatever to the idea that every time 2 NBA teams are getting on the floor that you've got the ultimate in competition that each of those teams can bring, because not every team is going to start its season legitimately thinking that it can win the title, which should be the goal of any sport, right? To win the last game, to be the champion. But that again feeds back into how it is true that even though you need to accept that at least on the most basic level you're getting honest competition, but that those other factors add to the richness and the narrative and the storylines, because the fans sitting there in that first season for the Thunder had completely different expectations. We knew we weren't going to the finals, but we expected progress, we expected effort, we expected teamwork, we expected a vision, a path. And now we expect to be up by 20 points at halftime. That's how things change. But it's just so, the idea that the only thing that matters is the score, and that Popovich was protecting his players, and that the only thing that matters is protecting the Spurs players so they can win a title is just not true. It's just not true.
Yeah. Well, so I take it you'll still be writing about this stuff even though you're going into the private sector.
Going to do my best.
We'll still see some basketball thoughts from you somewhere.
Still see some
hopefully.
Basketball thoughts. Yeah, I have some connections out there.
Okay.
We went to school with some folks that write, so I think there's going to be opportunities out there. We'll kind of have to see for sure. But, I think with any profession, if you're interested and you're capable and you're relentless, you're going to have opportunities. Whether it's in journalism or anything else. And so I think that there are opportunities out there, and the Oklahoman journalism certainly hasn't seen the last of me. I have enough connections and an interest that I think I can make it happen, and enough passion to cover some of those things. But whether it'll be writing about pick and roll defense or whether or not Mary Fallin is doing a good enough job being open, I guess remains to be seen. But so anybody out there looking for a freelancer, feel free to hit me up, I guess, right? But I think it's important for everybody to be engaged in things that they care about and be productive and contributors to a conversation, and I certainly hope to continue that.
Hey, well, thanks a lot for coming on, Michael.
Well, I appreciate it, Danny. Yeah. Thanks for having me on. It was good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. Thanks for coming on the Marroquin show.
It. Yeah.
Well, have a good trip. We'll see you around.
Yeah, thanks, man. That was pretty fun. I enjoyed that.
Okay, I'm here with my brother Leonard Marroquin. I just met you 10 minutes ago. Jesus.
Yep.
Where have you been?
I've actually been mistaken for you a couple times.
Really?
Yeah.
This happens?
This happens.
Golly, we're going to have to get rid of you efficiently.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're coming on as a music guest. You call yourself the Young Readers. Tell me a bit about how that name. I always wonder how bands pick their names.
Actually, when it first started, it was me and my friend London, and one of her favorite bands one of her favorite songs is Action Reaction by the Choir of Young Believers.
Oh.
And so she wanted to use Young in our name, and I think we were like Young Americans for a day, and then decided to change it to Young Readers.
Okay. And what's going on down in Norman? You have 2 gigs there tonight. Thanks for stopping in before that.
Right.
What's happening in Norman?
Yeah, I'm playing at the Blue Bonnet at 8, and then playing the late set with John Calvin at the Deli.
And what's the first song we're going to hear from you tonight?
I guess All I Have from my EP, Family Trees.
Okay. Okay, this is Jordan Herrera, Young Readers, and this is All I Have.
On blood and sweat and pain, but I never once had a thing to my name, and I know the things you want you have to earn. Is okay.
I was worried. Okay, you ready?
Yeah, I'm all impressed by your system, man. You know exactly what's going on. It's pretty awesome. Dana would be so proud.
Oh yeah, tell him.
I will.
I'm not friends with him on Facebook.
I'll have to tell him that's interesting.
I have to get him to it from an outside source.